I never saw it coming. The night she packed her things and walked out of the door, taking my son with her, it shattered me. The life I thought I had, the family I swore I'd protect, was slipping through my fingers in the blink of an eye. Betrayed. Not just by the woman I loved, but by the life I'd built for us. I thought work, success would be enough, but it wasn't. And now I was left to pick up the pieces, to figure out how to fight for the only thing that mattered. My son. They said I was too late, that the damage was done. But what if I told you that the real battle was just beginning? Hi, I'm Alex, and this is my story. It's funny, isn't it? How you can go on living, thinking everything's fine, and then one day, something shifts. So subtly you don't even notice until it's too late. That's where I am now, looking back at all of it, trying to piece together the mess that was my life before everything came crashing down. But let me start from the beginning. I've always been a hard-working guy, a professional. I put in long hours, stayed late at the office, took on extra projects, not because I loved it, but because I believed in the work, the integrity of it, and because I wanted to provide. My wife Claire and I had built a life together that I thought was solid, strong enough to weather anything, a job that was demanding but fulfilling, a wife who was the anchor to all of it, at least that's what I thought. A young son, Henry, who had started to show signs of the person he was going to become, smart, curious, with a smile that lit up the room. It felt like we had it all. Looking back now, I can't pinpoint exactly when things started to feel wrong. It was subtle, really. A glance here, a silence there. Conversations that started to become more strained, more about what we weren't saying than what we were. Claire had always been supportive of my work, sometimes a little too much, as if she were compensating for something. I never questioned it. After all, I was doing my part, wasn't I? I was the one who sacrificed time with family to build a career. I was the one who woke up at 5 a.m. and came home after 8 p.m., rarely even having time to check in on the mundane things. Henry's soccer practice, our dinner dates, the simple joys. I thought it was all worth it. Thought she understood why I was doing it. But now I'm not so sure. It wasn't just work that had shifted in the last few months. There was something else. An undercurrent of distance between us, a coldness in Claire that I couldn't quite explain. She started spending more time away from home, more time with her friends, more time doing things without me. It was like she needed her own space, but it wasn't just physical. It was emotional. Something had changed, and it wasn't like before, where I could just brush it off as a passing phase. The tension started to gnaw at me. I'd come home some evenings to find her on her phone, texting, or scrolling through something. I didn't think much of it at first, until I started to notice the way she'd quickly close the screen when I walked into the room, the way her eyes would dart away. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe I was paranoid. But then I began to sense something deeper, something I couldn't ignore anymore. It was the silence. In our conversations, we seemed to be talking past each other, small talk that felt more like a performance than a real exchange. I'd ask about her day, and she'd give me a vague answer, or even worse, she'd change the subject. I tried to shrug it off, but inside I felt the unease grow. And then one evening, just as I sat down to dinner with Henry and Claire, she looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "I think we need to talk." That's when I should have known. But I didn't. I couldn't see it coming. How could I? She had always been there, always stood by me. She was my wife. We were a team. What followed was one of the longest, most agonizing dinners of my life. Claire seemed distant, her gaze far away, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was preparing to say something that would change everything. The words she finally spoke felt like they came from someone else, a stranger even, when she said, "I've been thinking a lot, and I'm not sure about us anymore." I froze. My stomach churned, my mind racing. The weight of her words sank in slowly, and in that moment, I knew something had happened. Something was happening. But I couldn't even begin to understand what. And then it came, the subtle tremor in her voice as she continued. "I've decided to leave." I didn't hear much after that. My thoughts were a blur. It was as if the room itself had been sucked into a vacuum. The noise in my ears, the clinking of silverware, the hum of the refrigerator, faded. All I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding in my chest, and the sick realization that my life was about to change in a way I never expected. I wish I could say that I didn't see it coming, that I was blindsided. But looking back, I see all the small signs that pointed to this moment, all the ways I had failed to truly see her. I had spent so much of my life chasing success, so much of it focused on my work and career, that I didn't even notice that the one person who was supposed to stand beside me was quietly slipping away. And in that moment I realized that I had taken her for granted. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. I can still remember the shock that hit me when she said she was leaving with Henry, that she was taking him with her. My son, the one person who meant everything to me. The room seemed to spin. All the words I wanted to say, all the things I wanted to argue, were lost. What could I even say? What was there left to say when the person you trusted most had decided, to take it all away? Strange how quickly everything can unravel. How, in an instant, the life you thought you knew can be torn apart, piece by piece. Claire's words echoed in my head, repeating over and over again. I'm leaving. At first, it felt like a bad dream, one I was desperately trying to wake up from. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape it. Henry. That was the word that kept running through my mind. My son. I couldn't even comprehend the thought of not seeing him every day. He was just a kid, a little boy who needed his father, his family. And yet here I was, paralyzed in this storm of confusion and disbelief. I remember her saying, I think it's for the best. I've already made up my mind. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the distance in her words. The emotional barrier she had put up, a wall that felt so high I could never climb over it. I had failed, not just as a husband, but as a father. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My chest tightened, my breath shallow. You're taking him with you. I managed to choke out, my voice hoarse and foreign to me. Claire's eyes flickered for a brief moment, almost as if she hesitated, but then she nodded. He needs stability, a fresh start. I don't want him to grow up in a household full of tension. Tension. That word stung. Tension had always been there, sure, but it wasn't something I'd ever thought would lead to this, her leaving with our son. The weight of those words settled over me like a cold shroud. I had no idea how to respond. How do you argue against a mother wanting to do what's best for her child? But I was his father. I had just as much right to raise him, to be there for him. Claire, I said, my voice trembling, you can't just take him. You can't decide this alone. She didn't even flinch. The woman I had shared so much with, the one who had stood beside me through the years, was now a stranger. Cold, detached. I've already spoken with a lawyer, she said, her words cutting deeper than I could have imagined. It's done. I'm not asking for your permission, David. I'm telling you. That was the moment the world as I knew it truly shattered. The betrayal wasn't just in her leaving. It was in the way she had already taken the necessary steps behind my back, the way she had orchestrated her departure in secret, leaving me to catch up with the aftermath. It was a gut punch to the soul, a realization that everything I had trusted, everything I had built, was nothing more than a house of cards ready to fall. I thought about the late nights I'd spent working, the weekends I'd missed, the family dinners I hadn't attended. I had always told myself I was doing it for us, for our future, for Henry's future. I never realized how much I had neglected the present, how much Claire had felt invisible. But what hurt the most was the secrecy, the complete lack of respect for the relationship we'd built. I had no idea she'd reached out to a lawyer, let alone made plans to take Henry. It wasn't just the betrayal of trust, it was the utter erasure of my role in this family. I couldn't believe it. What's going to happen to us? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, as if I couldn't bear to hear the answer. Her eyes softened for the briefest of moments. I don't want to fight, David. I just want to move on, for all of us. Move on. The phrase, so simple in its delivery, was like a death sentence. All the years, all the moments we shared were reduced to nothing more than a line in a goodbye letter, a decision made without my input, without any regard for the life we had built together. It felt like the floor had been pulled out from beneath me, like I was suddenly free-falling through the abyss. The anger that rose up in me was immediate and all-encompassing, but there was also a deep, hollow grief. Grief for what I had lost and for the person I had become without even realizing it. "You think this is best?" I managed to ask through clenched teeth. "For Henry, for me." "I do," Claire said softly, her eyes unwavering. There was no doubt in her voice, no sign of hesitation. She had made up her mind. I didn't know what to say after that. What could I say? The woman I had loved, the woman I thought I knew, had already closed the door. The rest of the night passed in a haze of numbness. We didn't speak much after that exchange. It was as though all the words had been used up, leaving nothing but silence between us. Henry was already asleep in his room, blissfully unaware of the upheaval in the house. Claire and I sat in the living room, neither of us moving, neither of us knowing how to proceed. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I had to act, but I didn't know how. The betrayal wasn't just about her leaving. It was about what I had lost in the process. My family, my son, my role in this life, and the worst part, I didn't even see it coming. I didn't recognize the signs until they were too late. But I couldn't let this stand. Not without a fight. I wasn't sure what that fight would look like yet, but I was certain of one thing. I was going to fight for Henry, and I would never let this betrayal define me. It's a strange thing, how betrayal can make you feel both small and larger than life at the same time. I've never been one to confront people, at least not in the way I'm doing now. I've always been the kind of person who took the punches and kept moving forward. But this wasn't something I could just take on the chin and let slide. This was my family, my son, my life being taken away from me. The next day was a blur. Claire had packed some things and left to stay with her mother, taking Henry with her. I was left behind in the house we had built together. It felt wrong to even be there. Like the walls were closing in on me, suffocating me with the weight of all the things unsaid. I could hear the echoes of Henry's laughter from the last few months, the sounds of our little family falling apart. It made my chest tighten with rage and despair. I couldn't just let it go. I wouldn't. I called her once, twice, no answer. I left a message. "Claire, we need to talk. I'm not done with this. I'm not letting you walk away from everything we've built, from Henry, from me, without a fight. Call me." Nothing. I spent the entire day pacing, my thoughts running wild. I couldn't focus, couldn't eat, couldn't think of anything but the idea of my son, in someone else's arms, being told I wasn't there, that I had somehow failed him. It wasn't until late that night when I finally heard back from her. A text message. "We'll talk tomorrow. Tomorrow." It felt like an eternity. When I finally saw Claire the next day, it was like seeing a ghost. She wasn't the woman I had once known. There was a hardness to her now, an unyielding resolve that I hadn't seen before. She looked different, tired maybe. The bags under her eyes weren't from sleepless nights, they were from the weight of everything she had decided, the decisions she had already made long before I even had the chance to process what was happening. We met at a small cafe, the one we used to frequent when we first started dating. It felt fitting, our beginning, now our end. "I didn't want it to come to this, David," she said as we sat down. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, as though she were in control of everything. "I don't care what you wanted. You took my son from me, Claire. You made a decision behind my back, and now I'm left to clean up the mess." I could hear the anger rising in my voice, the edge sharp like broken glass. But it wasn't just anger. It was pain. It was the betrayal I had never seen coming. She didn't flinch. Not a single movement. She sat there, composed, and I was left to storm, barely holding myself together. "I never meant to hurt you, but I had to think of Henry first. He deserves stability. And right now, that doesn't include you." Her words hit me like a slap. But it wasn't just the words themselves. It was the finality in them, the certainty. It was like she had completely erased me from the equation, like I wasn't even part of this family anymore. "You think taking him away from me is stability?" I asked, trying to control the trembling in my hands. "You think leaving me out of his life is what's best? For him? You're making decisions for him without even considering me." Her eyes hardened. "I'm not making decisions for him, David. I'm making decisions with him. He's the one who needs to feel safe, and he's the one who needs consistency. And right now, that's not you. I don't know when you stopped seeing us, stopped seeing him, but I can't wait around for you to figure it out. I can't do it anymore." The words stung, and I knew in that moment she had already made up her mind. This wasn't about what was best for Henry. This was about her. She was angry too, hurt too, but she had decided that I was the problem, that the work I had put into building my career, the sacrifices I had made, had all amounted to nothing, and I was too late to realize it. "I'm not giving up, Claire," I said, my voice breaking through the wall she had built around herself. "I'm not going to just let you take Henry and walk away. I'm his father too. I have just as much right to raise him, to be there for him, to love him. You can't just take him away like that, not without a fight." Her expression softened for a moment, but the hardness quickly returned. "I don't want to fight, but I have to do what's right for him. I'm sorry, David." And just like that, the conversation ended. She stood up, not waiting for me to say anything else, and walked out of my life. It was over. But inside me, something else began to stir. Something stronger than the pain, stronger than the anger. It was determination. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't let my son be taken from me without fighting for him, for us. I would get Henry back. I would make sure he knew how much I loved him. And I would never let this betrayal, this injustice define me. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The days after Claire left were the hardest days of my life. I couldn't bring myself to leave. The house at first couldn't bring myself to face the outside world. Everything felt foreign to me now. The bed we used to share was cold, empty. Her side was untouched, and every time I glanced over I could feel the absence of her. The absence of us. I found myself wandering the house at night, the silence pressing in around me. It was in those quiet moments that the full weight of what had happened began to settle in. This wasn't just a bad patch in our marriage. This wasn't some temporary disagreement. No, this was a reckoning. The life I thought I had, the future I had been working towards, was now a distant memory, slipping through my fingers like sand. What hurt the most, though, was the betrayal. Not just in the way Claire had made decisions without me, but in the realization that everything I had sacrificed, every hour I had spent away from Henry, every decision I had made to climb higher in my career had led me to this point. I had been so focused on providing for my family, on being successful in the workplace, that I had failed to notice the cracks forming in my home. I had thought I was doing the right thing, but in the end, it wasn't the right thing at all. Could still hear her words in my head. "I can't wait around for you to figure it out." I didn't understand what she meant by that. I didn't understand how I had let her slip through my fingers. But then, in those quiet moments, I started to see it. I had been so consumed by my work, so convinced that success would solve all of our problems, that I had neglected the most important thing of all, the people I loved. I had built an empire in my mind, one where my career was the foundation, and everything else would follow. But in reality, the empire I had built was fragile, and now it was crumbling around me. I couldn't even remember the last time I had sat down with Claire for a real conversation, the last time we had laughed together, shared a moment of connection. When was the last time I had asked her how she was really doing, instead of just assuming she was fine? When was the last time I had asked Henry about his day, really asked him, and not just offered some distracted, "How was school?" The guilt was unbearable. It curled up inside of me like a knot in my stomach, twisting tighter each time I thought about it. But there was something else too, something sharper than the guilt, a growing sense of injustice. I had been pushed aside, erased from the equation without any warning. Claire had made her choice, and now I was left trying to pick up the pieces. The worst part of it all was the loneliness. It crept in slowly, as if at first I didn't even notice. But now, sitting in the stillness of the house, it was suffocating. The house was too quiet, too empty. Henry's toys, which had once been scattered around the living room, were gone. The messes that used to drive me crazy, clothes piled up on the couch, his backpack left in the hallway, had disappeared. And now, the house felt like a shell, hollow and silent. It wasn't just the absence of Claire and Henry. It was the absence of purpose. For so long, my purpose had been tied to my career, to providing for my family, to achieving success. But now, that had all fallen apart. I had nothing left to hold onto. I sat in the living room, my eyes unfocused, staring at the empty space in front of me. My mind raced with 1,000 different thoughts. Was this really how it was going to end? Was this the man I had become? The one who lost everything? Because he didn't know how to be present? I thought about Henry. I thought about the look in his eyes the last time I saw him, the way he hugged me goodbye, like he knew something was wrong, but didn't have the words to say it. I thought about how much he needed me, how much he still needed me. I couldn't just let him go. I couldn't let this be the end of my relationship with him. But what was I supposed to do now? What could I do? I was angry, furious even. Angry at Claire for what she had done. But more than that, I was angry at myself, angry that I had let it get to this point. I had been blind to the things that really mattered. But I couldn't afford to dwell on that. Not anymore. Something had to change. I could hear Claire's voice in my mind, telling me that I was too late, that I had missed my chance. But something inside me refused to believe that. I wasn't done yet. There had to be a way to fix this, to fight for what was mine. I needed to see Henry. I needed to remind him of who I was, remind him that I was his father, and I needed to show Claire that I wasn't going to just walk away from this. I stood up, my chest tight with determination. I wasn't going to sit here and wallow in self-pity. I wasn't going to let the betrayal define me. I was going to fight back. For Henry. For me. The decision to fight back wasn't easy. It didn't come to me in a single moment of clarity or inspiration. It came from the brokenness, from the emotional wreckage of the days following Claire's departure. There was something primal in me, something that couldn't stand by and let everything I loved slip away without so much as a struggle. I wasn't ready to let go of my son, of my family. I couldn't be. But what could I do? I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't an expert in family law, and I certainly didn't have any idea how to navigate the mess that had become my life. All I knew was that I had to act. I started with small steps. I reached out to a lawyer, a family attorney who specialized in custody battles. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I needed some direction, something to hold on to in the midst of this whirlwind. I remember sitting in that lawyer's office, the sterile white walls surrounding me, feeling out of place, like I didn't belong in that world. "So what's your plan?" the lawyer asked, looking at me over his glasses. He was calm, composed, as if everything in my life were just another case to him. But to me, it was everything. "I want to fight for custody," I said, the words coming out of my mouth almost like a confession. I had been so afraid to even think it, but now it was clear. I would do whatever it took to keep Henry in my life. The lawyer nodded, taking some notes. "It won't be easy. Custody cases can be messy. And if your wife has already made arrangements with her lawyer, you'll be facing an uphill battle." "I don't care," I said, the words burning in my throat. "I'm not going to let her take him from me without a fight." That was the first decision I made in this new fight for my family. It wasn't going to be easy, and I had no illusions about that. But I wasn't going to give up. I wouldn't let Claire dictate the terms of Henry's future without me. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with the lawyer, paperwork, and the slow, agonizing process of preparing for a battle I hadn't planned on fighting. It was exhausting, draining me emotionally and physically. But at the same time, it was a lifeline. It was something I could hold on to. I started to take small actions, little things that would show Claire I wasn't going to just fade into the background. I reached out to Henry's school, spoke with his teachers, and made sure I stayed involved in his life, even from a distance. I sent him messages, just simple ones like, "I miss you, buddy, I'm thinking of you." They were small gestures, but they meant something. I knew I couldn't win this fight without being present, without showing Henry that I was still his dad. Even if Claire thought she had all the control, even if she believed she could make all the decisions, I wasn't going to let her erase me from Henry's life. One night, after a long day of legal meetings and paperwork, I found myself sitting in the living room, staring at the empty space where Claire's things used to be. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep up this facade of strength. I was tired. The emotional weight of everything was starting to take its toll. But as I sat there, alone in the silence, I realized something important. This wasn't just about fighting for custody. It wasn't just about winning. This was about reclaiming my life, my sense of self. I had spent so many years building my career, so many years sacrificing for the future that I had neglected my present. Now I was standing at the crossroads. I could either keep fighting for what I thought was right, or I could let go. But letting go wasn't an option. Not yet. I couldn't afford to let the betrayal consume me. I couldn't afford to let the bitterness and anger take over. If I was going to fight for Henry, I needed to do it with integrity. I needed to fight for the right reasons. Not out of spite or revenge, but out of love. And so I made another decision. I would stay calm. I would stay composed. I would fight with everything I had, but I would fight fairly. I would do this the right way, not just for me, but for Henry. I knew that the battle ahead would be long. There would be moments when I would feel like giving up, when I would want to walk away and let Claire have her way. But every time I thought about Henry, about his smile, about the way he used to run to me when I walked through the door, I knew I couldn't give up. I had a lot to prove, not just to Claire, not just to the lawyer, but to myself. I had to prove that I could be the father I had always wanted to be. That I could be the man who could rise above the chaos, the anger, and the hurt. I was done letting fear and doubt control me. I was done being passive. I was going to take control of my life again. And I was going to do it with dignity. The days stretched on like a slow march. The meetings with the lawyer were becoming more frequent, the paperwork piling higher, and with each passing week, the battle for Henry grew more intense. But as much as I tried to remain focused on the end goal, getting my son back, something inside me was shifting. The initial surge of anger and hurt was starting to fade, replaced by something else. Resolve, determination, but also something that felt like clarity. I had spent so much time caught up in the storm of emotions, in the pain and betrayal, that I hadn't noticed how much I was changing. I had been so consumed by what I was losing, I hadn't realized what I was gaining, a deeper sense of who I was, a more grounded understanding of what I truly needed, and more importantly, who I was doing this for. At first, I was fighting because I had to. I had to prove that I wasn't just going to sit idly by. I had to show Claire, show the world, that I wasn't some passive bystander. But slowly, the fight stopped being about proving something to others. It started becoming about proving something to myself. I had spent so many years defining myself by my career, by my work, and I had neglected the most important thing, the love I had for my son, the connection that would never be severed no matter what happened. The turning point came one afternoon. It had been a long week, one full of tense phone calls and difficult negotiations with Claire's lawyer, and I was exhausted. I had spent hours going over documents, looking for any loophole, any angle I could use to push back against Claire's decision. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my head heavy in my hands, when my phone rang. It was a call I had been avoiding, a call from Claire. I didn't know if I should pick up. I was angry. I was still raw from everything that had happened, and I knew that if I answered, there would be more words, more accusations, more harsh tones that would just add fuel to the fire. But then, as I stared at the screen, I realized something. If I didn't pick up now, if I didn't try to break through, this wall that had formed between us, I would never get the chance. So, I answered. Hello? My voice sounded strained even to my own ears. David, I know this is hard. Claire's voice came through the phone, quiet, hesitant. But I think we need to talk. For Henry's sake. I know this isn't easy for either of us, but I want us to figure out what's best for him. I didn't know what to say at first. I had been preparing for a confrontation, for her to stick to her guns, to remind me that she had the upper hand, but the softness in her voice caught me off guard. I'm willing to meet, I said, my own voice surprisingly calm. But we're not just talking about Henry. We need to talk about everything, about what happened, about us. There was a pause on the other end, a long one. Then, Claire spoke, her voice quieter now, like she was choosing her words carefully. I'm sorry, David. I know this is hard, and I know I've made mistakes, but I thought I was doing what was best for him, for all of us. I felt the sharp sting of her words again, But this time I didn't let it take over. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was clearer, more centered. The hurt was still there, yes, but now there was a sense of resolve that ran deeper than all the bitterness and regret. I get that, I said slowly, my voice steady. But we're both doing what we think is best for him, Claire. And I'm not going to back down from being his father. Not now, not ever. The words were out before I could stop them. It was the truth, simple, undeniable. But it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us, about Henry. I know, she whispered, and for the first time in a long while there was a softness in her voice that I hadn't heard before. I'm not trying to take him from you. I never wanted that. I don't know how to fix everything, David. I don't know what to do anymore. And in that moment, I realized something that I hadn't been able to see before. We had both been lost in our own pain, our own hurt, so consumed by everything that had gone wrong that we had forgotten why we had gotten here in the first place. 'Cause we loved Henry. That was the turning point. It wasn't a sudden epiphany or a grand moment of redemption. It was quiet, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The realization that for the first time in a long while we were talking, as two people who had once shared a life, two people who still had a chance to rebuild something, for Henry's sake. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew that this battle would drag on, that the scars from this betrayal would take time to heal. But what I also knew was this. I was ready to do whatever it took to repair what I could. I would never give up on being the father I knew I could be. And maybe, just maybe, Claire and I could find a way to navigate this new reality without destroying each other. The fight was far from over. But in that quiet conversation, I had taken my first step toward rebuilding. I woke up the next morning with a sense of clarity that felt almost foreign. The heaviness in my chest had lightened, and while the battle for Henry was far from over, something inside me had shifted. The fight hadn't ended. It had merely begun to take a new form. Over the following weeks, Claire and I had more conversations, difficult and painful conversations, but they were also filled with a sense of understanding we hadn't had before. It wasn't that we agreed on everything, far from it, but for the first time since all of this began, we were talking. Truly talking, instead of just blaming and fighting. It was messy, and it wasn't perfect, but there was progress. We spoke more about Henry, about what was best for him. We talked about co-parenting, about finding a way to navigate this new chapter of our lives without letting it destroy what we had left. There were still moments of tension, moments when the old hurt resurfaced, but there was also something new emerging between us. Mutual respect. Respect for each other as parents, even if we no longer respected each other in the way we once had, and while I couldn't say that everything had been fixed, or that all the damage had been undone, I could say that I felt more certain of my place in Henry's life. No matter what Claire and I decided, no matter what the court said, I was his father, and that was something no one could take away from me. One afternoon, after weeks of lawyers' meetings and long discussions, I got a call from Claire. "I think we've come to an agreement," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "It's not perfect, but it's something we can work with." I listened closely as she outlined the terms, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was fighting an uphill battle. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a step forward. We had agreed to shared custody, with the understanding that Henry would split his time between our homes. There were still details to work out, still emotions to process, but we had come to a place of compromise. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, and I realized something important. I had gotten back more than just my son. I had gotten my voice back. I had gotten my life back. I wasn't the same man I had been before. The betrayal, the anger, the grief, they had changed me, yes, but they had also shaped me into someone stronger, someone who understood the value of what he had, someone who didn't take the people he loved for granted anymore. I had learned that success in my career meant nothing if I didn't have the people I loved by my side. And so as the weeks passed, I began to rebuild, slowly, at first. I took Henry out for weekend trips, just the two of us. We went to the park, we visited museums, we shared meals at our favorite diner. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes the silence between us was deafening, but the connection was there. And every time I saw him smile, every time he ran to me with his arms outstretched, I knew that I was on the right path. The work I had done on myself, the work I had done to rebuild my relationship with Henry, was the most important thing I had ever done. It wasn't the career I had built or the success I had achieved. It was this. I also started to re-examine my life outside of fatherhood. The career that had once consumed me no longer felt like my only purpose. I began exploring other opportunities, ones that would allow me to have more time with Henry and focus on what really mattered. I wasn't ready to walk away from my profession completely, but I was learning how to balance it with the life I wanted to create moving forward. Claire and I, while still separate, had found a new way to communicate, and even in that quiet space there was some semblance of peace. We had agreed to put Henry first, always, and that had become our unspoken bond, the one thing we could both hold on to. I'd be lying if I said the journey was easy. It wasn't. There were still moments of bitterness, still times when I questioned everything. But I had learned that strength wasn't about avoiding the hard moments or pretending they didn't exist. Strength was about standing in the face of them, accepting them, and finding a way to move forward. And as I stood in the park one sunny afternoon, watching Henry play with a group of kids, I realized just how far I had come. I wasn't the man I was when this all began, the angry lost man who had been blindsided by betrayal. I was someone who had learned to rise, to reclaim his power, to find peace in the midst of the storm. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It wasn't about custody battles or legal victories. It was about the simple truth that I had a son who needed me, and I was going to be there for him, no matter what. I was starting over. But this time, I was doing it with the clarity and purpose I had always needed. And that was enough.